Sorry for taking so long to make my video review of the Nintendo Direct, because I felt as if I had already gotten my thoughts across clearly in the stream itself, and then I segued into a gameplay stream, and then I went ahead and started reacting to other people's content. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was actually a really, really, really good Direct. And anybody who says this is one of the worst directs of all time, or even one of the worst directs of the year, is just completely out of touch with reality and really needs to get called out. And there's just a lot of things that you have to address when discussing the mindset that people have that this was a bad direct. And I think chief among them, the whole general direct versus partner showcase, because I feel like a lot of people forget that general directs do not mean that we are exclusively looking at Nintendo first-party games. These have always been showcases of a wide range of software on Nintendo consoles from a wide range of publishers and developers, not always with Nintendo's direct involvement. Okay, we really need to clear this up, because I've heard so many people freaking out about the lack of supposed new Nintendo announcements, how there's nothing to play, there's nothing to look forward to. And the reality is, if you look at the schedule, it's absolutely packed. And the reason for that is that throughout the year, Nintendo has done smaller partner showcases that have slowly unveiled games every couple of months or so. You know, we got the Mario Galaxy movie one. We got the Star Fox one. We got the Tamagotchi Life one. What we're seeing now is that we're seeing people make this weird assertion that because Nintendo didn't come out with this huge mind-blowing direct, that somehow the Switch 2 as a whole is disappointing, when in actuality we've been getting big major releases all year, that we've been getting major third-party releases all year, that the Nintendo Switch has been doing very well all year. But we're still in this weird phase where the community wants to pretend as if there's nothing to play on this thing, and that it's an underwhelming piece of hardware. And the way they do that is kind of nebulous, because they come out and they say that indie games don't matter, that third-party games that don't matter, that JRPGs don't matter, okay? If a game isn't a Mario or a Zelda game or Super Smash Bros., they don't give a shit about it. And they made their opinions known very well throughout this, because we saw a lot of that in this showcase, right? You know, I was seeing Nintendo Land breaking down in tears over not getting 3D Mario. Okay, I was seeing people freaking out over what they chose to focus on in this showcase. You know, I was seeing people getting upset about JRPGs getting focused, about third-party games getting focused. And to me, I think it speaks volumes about the mindset that people are in, that people see third-party games in a Nintendo Direct showcase and automatically assume it has to be a late port. Because there certainly were late ports in this showcase. You know, Stellar Blade came out a while ago. There have been Final Fantasy 14 really should have come out on Switch 1, right? You know, there are late ports that exist here, but there are also games that have not launched on any platform yet. You know, Onimusha and Kingdom Hearts 4 are two really good examples, where these are games that were showcased in other presentations first, you know, Onimusha at that PlayStation showcase the other day, and then were revealed again in the Nintendo Direct format. However, just because these games appeared elsewhere, that doesn't make their appearance here worthless. Okay, it doesn't mean that they don't have value. Okay, they're promoting the Nintendo version of the game. I don't know what's so complicated to understand about this, but a lot of Nintendo YouTubers seem to have this mindset that everyone is just going to automatically buy every third-party game on the alternative pieces of hardware, that people are never going to buy games on third-party. And I keep seeing people say that it's a proven thing that third parties aren't doing well on Switch 2, but that's very clearly, observably not the case. When you look at the success of Pragmata or Resident Evil Requiem or Street Fighter 6 even, what you see is a pretty consistent trend of third-party games doing reasonably well on the platform, even if they are late ports or have versions on other consoles. And this is the thing that really bothers me about this presentation, because there were a lot of games coming from these third-party publishers that looked genuinely good and genuinely exciting. Onimusha was the one game out of that PlayStation showcase that I really liked and was advocating for a Switch release for. I would never have bought it on a PlayStation or got it on PC, but I was definitely going to pick it up when it came to Switch 2. And now that it is, I couldn't be more ecstatic about it. Right? That's just one example. You also have Kingdom Hearts 4. You have the Kingdom Hearts collection. These are big announcements. That's just my mindset looking at this and thinking about it. There are definitely games that I'm not interested in and I do think are iffy. Dragon's Dogma 2 I've made fun of over the years. But at the same time, there are so many good games shown that I am going to pick up over the next 3 months that I was generally pretty happy with the Direct. Now, my mindset on this is that I do think it was a little bit too third-party focused. I feel like for something like this, all you would have had to do was just be oh yeah, here's a list of all the third-party games going. Yeah, just do the sizzle reel thing is kind of my mentality on it. I do think there were too many of them, and that maybe they should have focused on exclusively on the third-party games that had not launched on any other platform yet. But again, looking at the actual list of good original games here, games like Dragon Quest Monsters, games like Kingdom Hearts 4, it's just you look at stuff like that, and it's just games like Final Fantasy Resonance, which looks great. You look at games like this and you come away thinking that yeah, these are actually pretty solid original titles. But what ends up happening is that people just write them off and ignore them because they're not Nintendo exclusive. Some of them are launching on Switch 1 as well. Some of them are late ports or whatever. And it's just I just feel like that's a really bad way of looking at it. You know what I mean? It's it's not something you would ever see coming out of any other console. I believe Xbox got Final Fantasy VII-R way after the PS4 did, right? Was that considered, was that something that people complained about? Was that something people whined over? It just doesn't happen, okay? It's not something you really see when it comes to any of the other platforms. But for some reason, whenever we have a showcase like this that's very third-party focused, you have a lot of people coming out crying and seething about it. And I do think a big reason for that is because what a threat Nintendo with strong third-party support is for the industry at large. The gaming industry as we know it will not survive Nintendo with third-party support. It's just the fact of the situation is that Nintendo with third-party support would objectively be the ultimate gaming machine, and there'd be no real reason to ever bother with anything else. So, of course, industry people, especially those involved with the other platforms, have been very desperately trying to stop this from happening for decades. Okay, this is why PlayStation put so much effort in sabotaging third-party relations with Nintendo over the past 25 years. It was purely to stop this kind of thing from happening. In short, what we're seeing here from these reactionaries, from these YouTubers, what we're seeing is very similar to what happened in the Wii U when Nintendo came out with really strong third-party support initially. This is something that terrifies the industry, and they have to put a stop to it. And so they came out swinging, trying to call this the worst Direct of all time, trying to shit on all these games, trying to say they would never sell on Switch 2, and they're using Wii U era tactics in an industry that's evolved far past that. The simple fact of the matter is the Wii U is never going to happen again. The Nintendo Direct format has cut out gaming journalists. Nobody's on Twitter. No one's listening to these weirdos. Andre Seegers tweeted out that this was the worst Direct of all time. Nobody takes him seriously. Nobody follows Game Explain. Again, so many people tried rallying around hating this Direct, and it just doesn't hit that hard. when you take into consideration just how many other directs we've gotten this year, how many other announcements we've gotten this year, how many games we still have to come out this year, like the entire cope just doesn't really make any sense, especially when you take into consideration they have already announced the next Nintendo Direct, the one for Splatoon Raiders that's coming at the end of the month. Again, when you think about things like that, you really start understanding where we are right now, where we're getting so many Nintendo Directs, it is impossible to keep up with them at all. And a lot of these people, they really rallied behind this idea that like the general Nintendo Direct would be the real one. It would be the big one. It would be the E3 one. It would be like old times. They would be able to like, hype up the Mario and the Zeldas while like ignoring everything else. But that's just not possible for them anymore. Nintendo did a Nintendo Direct where they only showed off Fire Emblem, Xenoblade, and a couple of other smaller games. They promoted their smaller brands and third-party products in a format that did not allow them to be overshadowed by the big games that are almost assuredly coming. People are complaining about not seeing more from Zelda right now, but do you really think that's going to be true like in the next 3 months? Like, do you really think we're not going to see more footage from it? Do you really think they're not going to do another Nintendo Direct before the end of the year? Like, it's just complaining about this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in my mind. Like, they could reveal anything about this game whenever they want, through Nintendo Today, through Twitter, anything. Like, hyper-fixating on this idea that this Direct is bad and we're not going to get another one for months is just completely out of touch with what we've been seeing out of their marketing division for the past year or so. In which we've been getting more directs, in which we've been seeing a bigger variety of directs, in which we've been seeing them experiment more with Twitter announcements, with Nintendo Today announcements. Like, in a lot of ways, Nintendo has outgrown the Nintendo Direct format. Too many neck-bearded, man-child Nintendo YouTubers are reacting to these shows live and complaining about everything, These are guys that really need to go see please, please, please get a life foundation, okay? These guys will complain about everything Nintendo does, no matter what, and they're just kind of unpleasable. It is very, very important for Nintendo to evolve their brand in a way where it's not really possible for these men to damage control anything that they do going forward. And I think by simply expanding their announcement schedule, like all throughout the year, doing Nintendo Directs, doing Nintendo Today announcements, doing the Twitter drops, doing all this stuff, like this is how they're going to manage it, is that they're going to announce so many things that it's pretty much impossible for the average YouTuber to damage control all of it. Someone like Angry Joe will do his reaction to like the June 2026 Direct, call it like the worst thing he's ever seen, and then not talk about Nintendo for another year. In the meanwhile, Nintendo's going to be doing all these announcements all throughout the year that get a lot of hype, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of attention, and like Joe, completely clueless, will not be able to damage control or downplay what Nintendo is doing. It's going to be like so far beyond him that he doesn't even know what to do. For example, Star Fox, right? Star Fox Zero was successfully downplayed with its release on Wii U. What's happened in the decade since? We've gotten several new Star Fox releases. Star Fox appeared in a $1 billion movie, and now we're getting a remake that looks to be very highly successful and popular. Again, seemingly out of nowhere, but when you look at like what Nintendo did over the past decade to promote Star Fox, to keep Star Fox relevant, to keep it like an iconic Nintendo brand. When you look at how they were able to promote the remake, when you see how they were able to do it in a way that made it completely impossible for game journals to downplay or ignore it, like it just resulted in this game that's probably going to be one of the Switch 2's bigger hits. Rather surprisingly, I honestly think there's a good chance that it might actually outperform Donkey Kong Bonanza at this stage. And this isn't an isolated incident. Nintendo can drop information about any of their games at any time. A lot of people are complaining about the Dusk Floods right now. they announced the closed beta. Okay, they're gonna show some more information about that game shortly. Okay, Splatoon Raiders, we're getting a direct for that. Ocarina of Time, we're probably gonna get a direct for that. Like, the simple fact of the matter is, I don't think a bad direct is some huge, like, career-ending blunder that, like, a lot of people think it's gonna be. And I really think that people are very, very much overestimating their own relevance when it comes to complaining about this kind of stuff. Because when you pull back the curtain even a little bit, like, what you end up with is just people like Nintendo Land or Demish that are just complaining because they didn't get, like, a 3D Mario game. They're complaining because of the RPGs. They're complaining about, like, Nintendo not, like, pandering to them, they think. I've been saying this for a long time, but I think I need to reiterate this here, is that Nintendo YouTubers don't evaluate Nintendo Directs based on games. They hype them up based on hype, essentially. Like, they want something that they can react to, something they can make content off of, something they can talk about. And what we're seeing increasingly with these Nintendo Directs is that they're being made in a way that doesn't really emphasize that style of content. They are emphasizing the gameplay. They are emphasizing what the game is. You're not getting these bullshit trailers of, like, them making these crazy implications or anything. Like, it would be very easy for Nintendo to just drop a Duskbloods trailer today and then have every FromSlop, like, fan theory YouTuber, like, on it immediately. But what we're seeing here is that, like, instead they're focusing on the actual games. And I think that's the important thing that we need to keep in mind right now, is that the online gaming audience has no credibility at all. They don't play a lot of games. They don't know what they're talking about. They're hacks, they're frauds, they make content and don't actually play games. Okay. There are very few people in this sphere that I would call actual genuine gamers. Just as an example of what I'm talking about, everyone keeps saying that nothing's out on the Switch 2, that there's nothing to play, that it's been like a complete desert of releases since, like, the September Direct last year. And, in the month since, we got Mario Tennis Fever, we got Pokapia, we got Tamagotchi Life, we got Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. And Yoshi and the Mysterious Book in particular is very interesting because it's an original Nintendo game. It's very fresh. It's very original. It's very different from any other game that exists. And the vast majority of the community is just ignoring it. And the reason for that is because it's a game that doesn't really tickle the fancy of, like, the YouTube community. They see it as something that they can't really exploit. They see it as something that's kind of lazy or basic or childish. They don't understand the appeal of something like this. And as a result, they don't respect it. And as a result of that, they don't consider it a real game. Same with Tamagotchi, same with Pokapia, same with Mario Tennis Fever. Like, 4 absolutely banger games that have come out this year that have just been, like, completely dismissed by the community at large because they just can't accept the fact that, like, not every game needs to be some AAA 3D platformer or a Zelda game, essentially. And that's what we've been seeing over and over again when it comes to these presentations. This time we're seeing people complain about Xenoblade, but, in the September Direct, we saw people complaining about Fire Emblem. You're still seeing people act like Fire Emblem isn't a big deal, and it totally is. And we're in the process of the same thing happening to Splatoon Raiders, to Fire Emblem, Rhythm Heaven, everything else we know about in the foreseeable future. And it's something that really does need to get called out. It's something that we really do have to address. It's something that we really do have to deal with because we have to deal with these situations every single time. Where, like, we have to deal with these weirdos coming out and trying to say that these games aren't popular or that they're not good enough or they're not exciting enough for a Nintendo Direct. And, like, I would rather the Nintendo Direct format die entirely than to allow these people to continue this nonsense. And that's kind of my mentality going forward, honestly, is that, like, yeah, like, the Nintendo Directs are great. I enjoy them, but, like, we've seen just how the community at large tries to weaponize them against the company, where they're constantly coming out, disrespecting every release, disrespecting the developers, disrespecting Nintendo, and trying to like shit talk games long before they come out, and just create these weird like narratives about them and trying to complain about them. And it's just, it needs to stop. Is just my mentality on it. And I do think their direction with this of like putting out more directs, going on, talking about exclusive titles, covering exclusive games, that seems to be a formula that works. But what we're seeing now is that the rest of the industry has not adapted to this trend. They still believe that the big monumental Nintendo announcements are going to come out of these kinds of like compilation events, when in actuality they're just going over releases for the next 4 months or so. The biggest announcement of the year so far, Star Fox, came out of nowhere, got its own direct, and it is releasing a month later. Like, it's not unreasonable to assume that we're going to see other Nintendo games follow similar release schedules. And as a result of that, I find it very difficult to take people seriously when they start demanding to know, like, what Nintendo has coming out in the foreseeable future. When we have plenty of games out already, when we have plenty of games that have been giving release dates, when we have plenty of things to look forward to already, like, we don't really need more at this stage. It's just kind of my mentality. I'm already kind of overwhelmed with all the games I've been playing, with like trying to beat like Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, and like playing DK64 again and stuff like that. Like, I'm kind of overwhelmed, but like what I see from the community is a bunch of people who clearly don't play a lot of Nintendo games, who are just like moaning and crying about things that they don't really have the slightest clue about. Right now, there's this line of dialogue from these NPCs, from these grifters. Like, they have this idea that, like, the Nintendo Switch 2 hasn't sold itself to its audience yet, that it doesn't have any system sellers, that it's been a rather underwhelming launch. And I'm just finding myself, like, scratching my head at the notion, considering how much Mario Kart World has sold and how much people love Bonanza. Like, to me, the Switch justified itself on day one, but that just goes back to my point that it really feels like the industry is trying to turn this into another Wii U, but they're finding that Nintendo has, because of a lot of smart decisions, established themselves in a way where YouTubers or game journals are not in a position to manipulate the market the way they have been traditionally. And they're trying to bring like the shareholders into it, and they're trying to like, tank the review scores of games. They're doing everything they possibly can, but like, it seems as if what we're seeing now is just that like Nintendo fans are becoming increasingly aware of just how biased the industry at large is towards Nintendo. Even if this was a bad Nintendo Direct, we still had lots of games announced. We still have lots of things coming out in the foreseeable future, and we would simply get another Nintendo Direct. But it wasn't a bad showcase at all. Like, if anything, it was a pretty good showcase that was held back by a lot of padding of a lot of games that really should have been on Nintendo Switch to begin with. And that is indeed a problem, but I think that speaks more to the problems with like third-party developers and how they're all coming on board with Nintendo now because the console's so popular and it's so successful and they can't really ignore it anymore. Like, what we're seeing now is just obviously the beginnings of a new golden age of Nintendo in which they dominate the entire gaming industry. They have won the console war, essentially. And when you see people say things like, I'll play that third-party game on another piece of hardware, and I don't want to see this in a Nintendo Direct, like, what you're seeing is just incredibly short-sighted, stupid people who don't really seem to understand where the industry is going, where these third-party games are succeeding on Nintendo hardware. They do have an audience. They are going to keep coming out on Nintendo hardware, and they are going to be launching day and date with identical features and visuals as the other versions. The Nintendo version is going to be the highest quality version. It is going to be the most successful. Like, you're going to see that happen over the next 10 to 20 years as PlayStation, Xbox, and PC fade into irrelevancy. And right now, what we're seeing is that we're seeing the older gaming audience just refuse to accept it because this isn't right to them. This comes off as like an anomaly. They really thought that like Nintendo would stop being successful after the Switch won, and what they're finding out the hard way is that that just isn't true. And they really are coping and seething about Nintendo's success. You know, the funniest thing about this, and the thing I noticed immediately, was this idea that a lot of people had that the other showcases were better than this, that Summer's Game Fest was better, that the Xbox Showcase was better, and that the Sony State of Play was better. Sony's State of Play was far more controversial than this. You know, that's going to be a thing that has real long lasting consequences. You know, we've seen how badly Sony's first party sales have dipped over the past 5 years because of The Last of Us Part 2. Okay, Sony's on the way out. Like the fact that anybody would make that stupid argument just goes to show you just how out of touch they actually are. Like this Nintendo Direct was very well received among its actual audience. The people complaining are terminally online weirdos who don't know the first thing about video games.